What up YouTube? Welcome to the Dare to Do Knowledge channel. Today we are reviewing a video about the psychology of self-transformation. So if anybody want to better themselves, this is the video to do it, man. So let's learn something. Why we eat mukbang spaghetti.
Have you ever looked at an old photo of yourself and felt like you were staring at a stranger? The smile looks familiar, but the eyes seem different, softer perhaps, or maybe more naive. You can almost hear the silence between the moments that photo captured, the laughter that used to feel effortless, the confidence that wasn't yet scarred by experience. And in that quiet realization, something inside you whispers, "I'm not that person anymore." Change doesn't happen the way stories tell it. It doesn't arrive with thunder or revelation. It comes in whispers, in the pauses between decisions, in the tired sighs you let out without meaning to. It's the way you stop chasing certain people, the way you no longer explain yourself the same way, the way your silence starts to mean peace instead of defeat. Transformation is not an explosion. It's erosion, slow, patient, invisible to the naked eye, but steady as the tide wearing down the shore. You begin to notice it in subtle ways. Old music stops resonating. Certain jokes don't land. You start craving solitude, not out of sadness, but because something within you feels sacred now, fragile and worth protecting. The world hasn't changed, but your perception of it has. The colors are duller in some places, brighter in others. And you wonder when the shift began. Was it the heartbreak you barely survived, the betrayal that cut too deep, or the quiet night you finally told yourself the truth? Psychologists call it ego death, the disintegration of the self you once believed was permanent. Neuroscientists might say your brain's pathways have been rewired, that emotional pain forced new neural connections to form. But spiritually, it feels like burial and birth happening at once. You are both the mourner and the newborn, the one who grieves and the one who breathes again. It's strange, isn't it? We say we want change to become better, wiser, freer, yet when it comes, it terrifies. Because transformation doesn't only add, it also takes away. It strips you bare, leaving you without your familiar masks, without the comfort of who.
Oh, so it's scary when you try to do better. Like, it's something that you don't recognize no more. You're like, oh my God, it's scary because you're so used to being your old self. And ooh, it makes sense now.
Who you used to be. And in that nakedness, you must meet yourself again, not the one shaped by approval or fear, but the one that's been waiting beneath it all along. So you begin to ask the real question, the one that echoes through every sleepless night of evolution. If change is inevitable, what truly awakens it? Because the moment you stop fearing the death of your old self is the moment your new life quietly begins. Imagine a child walking carefully across a creaking wooden floor, holding their breath so the house stays quiet. They've learned that silence keeps the storm away. They've learned to read the weather in the faces of those who are supposed to protect them. Every frown, every sigh, every slammed door becomes a code to decipher. And somewhere in that decoding, they begin to disappear. You were that child once, or someone like you. You learned early that love wasn't unconditional, it was earned. So you began shaping yourself like clay, smoothing out the parts that got you in trouble, hiding the ones that drew too much attention. You learned to smile even when it hurt, to agree even when you didn't, to become agreeable, useful, small, because safety lived inside approval. You didn't know it then, but each small compromise was the foundation of a mask that would follow you into adulthood. Psychologists call this the birth of the false self. It's a survival mechanism, not a flaw. According to attachment theory, a child will choose attachment over authenticity every time because love means survival. The child who senses emotional neglect or volatile affection learns to perform, to mirror what others need, to suppress what they feel. The nervous system itself adapts.
About to say why I got quiet.
Cortisol spikes, empathy sharpens, intuition becomes hypervigilant. You didn't just learn to survive, your biology did too. But the cost of becoming loved is often becoming lost. You grew up fluent in the emotions of others, yet illiterate in your own. You could predict your parents' moods, but not name your own fears. You could comfort friends, but struggle to comfort yourself. And so,
that's crazy. You can comfort others, but when it comes to yours, you can't comfort yourself. That's real. That's real life facts right there, y'all. Because how do you comfort yourself? You don't know what.
piece by piece, the authentic self, the one who felt freely, who spoke boldly, went underground, buried beneath layers of adaptation. Years later, you call it people-pleasing, perfectionism, burnout, or self-doubt. But beneath those modern labels is the same child, still whispering, "Will I still be loved if I stop performing?" The world doesn't teach you how to answer that. It only teaches you how to keep pretending. And yet, transformation never begins with pretending. It begins with breaking. With the moment your carefully constructed identity collapses under its own weight. When exhaustion outweighs approval, when your silence becomes unbearable, when you realize the mask has started to suffocate you, that's when something deeper, older begins to stir. Because the truth is, your real self never disappeared. It's just been waiting quietly for permission to exist again. So the question becomes not, who did you have to become to be loved, but something far more terrifying and freeing. Who must you become now to be free? Somewhere along the line, you stopped asking who you were and started asking who you needed to be. That's how adulthood begins.
Facts. It's not who you want to be, it's who do I gotta be to get the money, the approval, females to like me, make friends, the boss to like me. You gotta become something that you not. So you put on all these masks, laugh at all these fake jokes, hang out with all these people and it's draining. Ooh, they spitting, bro. But deep down inside, it's not what you want.
Not as a celebration of freedom, but as a quiet continuation of the childhood play only now. The stage is larger, the stakes are higher, and the audience is everywhere. You wake up each day and wear your chosen mask. For some, it's the achiever, efficient, competent, tireless, earning love through success. For others, it's the caretaker kind, selfless, endlessly available, mistaking exhaustion for virtue. Or maybe it's the stoic unreadable, composed, immune to pain, convinced that emotions are liabilities. Whatever form it takes, the mask becomes your second skin, a costume stitched together from expectations, societies, your families, your own. And soon, you forget that you were ever naked underneath it. Carl Jung called this the persona, the face we present to the world, crafted to survive within its rules. It's not inherently false, in fact, it's necessary. We need masks to navigate civilization, to play our roles, to protect our vulnerabilities. But the danger lies in mistaking the mask for the face, in believing that the performance is who you truly are. When that happens, life becomes theatre. You laugh on cue, love on cue, even break down on cue. Every emotion rehearsed, every silence curated. You don't live, you perform. And yet, beneath the applause, something aches, because the longer you wear the mask, the heavier it becomes. It starts as armor, but turns into a cage. You begin to sense the difference between being admired and being seen, between being respected and being understood. Neuroscientists might say your brain has grown addicted to external validation dopamine hits from approval, reinforcing the same neural loop that once made you feel safe as a child. But psychologically, it feels simpler. You've built a beautiful prison and called it success. There are moments, quiet and fleeting, when the mask slips. Maybe during heartbreak, or solitude, or the stillness of early morning when you realize you no longer recognize the voice inside your own head. Those are the cracks, the brief glimpses of the self buried beneath layers of adaptation. And if you listen closely, you'll hear it, the faint pulse of authenticity waiting to be remembered. Because the truth is, the mask served its purpose. It protected the child, it guided the adult, but it was never meant to be permanent. Transformation begins when you stop polishing your disguise and start confronting what's underneath. And, somewhere in that confrontation, beneath the noise of who you were told to be, the unconscious begins to stir. Change feels mystical when you're in it, like your soul is shedding its skin. But underneath the poetry, there's science quietly unfolding. Every time you repeat a thought, every time you react the same way, every time you choose comfort over courage, your brain is taking notes. It's building highways of habit, carving grooves in your neural
Ooh, that's a bar. Every time you choose comfort. Hold on.
Change feels mystical when you're in it, like your soul is shedding its skin. But underneath the poetry, there's science quietly unfolding. Every time you repeat a thought, every time you react the same way, every time you choose comfort over courage,
every time you choose comfort over comfort. No. Every time you choose comfort over courage, your brain is writing it down. It is going to become a habit.
Brain is taking notes. It's building highways of habit, carving grooves in your neural landscape. And over the years, those grooves become identity. You don't just have thoughts, you are the patterns that repeat inside you. Neuroscientists call it neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself based on experience. What fires together, wires together. Meaning, if you spend 10 years believing you're unworthy, your neurons have rehearsed that story into permanence. They've built a chorus that sings it automatically. It's not weakness when you struggle to change, it's biology. You're fighting a machine you unknowingly programmed, but the miracle is this: the same brain that learned fear can learn freedom. Studies on cognitive restructuring show that with conscious effort, emotional reflection, and repetition, the brain begins to prune old pathways and grow new ones. Just like muscles, thoughts strengthen with use. Each time you pause before reacting, each time you question an old belief, each time you sit with discomfort, instead of escaping it, you're teaching your brain a new language, a new self. Psychologists describe identity as a feedback loop. Your beliefs shape your behavior, and your behavior reinforces those beliefs. Break one side of that loop, and the entire cycle begins to shift. That's why change doesn't begin with motivation. It begins with awareness. Viktor Frankl once wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose." That space is neuroplasticity in motion, the tiny moment where the story can change. And yet, neuroscience alone can't explain the ache of transformation. Carl Jung believed that the psyche's evolution requires integration, that to change, you must face what you've repressed. The emotional truth buried in your unconscious holds the keys to real rewiring. Without it, change remains surface level and intellectual concept, not an embodied experience. Modern trauma research echoes this. When emotions are processed and reintegrated rather than avoided, the nervous system literally recalibrates. The past stops looping, the body stops bracing, and the mind begins to trust its own calm. So perhaps the brain is more than an organ, it's a storyteller. One that has told the same tale for so long, it's forgotten there are blank pages ahead. Change begins not when you invent a new story, but when you stop believing every chapter before this one was final. Because transformation isn't an idea, you think it's a truth you feel, and feeling it is where the rewiring truly begins. There comes a moment in every transformation when everything you once were begins to collapse. It doesn't happen with fireworks or revelation, but in silence, the kind that hums behind closed doors and sinks into your bones. You wake one day and realize the world that used to fit you now feels too small, like a room whose walls are inching closer each time you breathe. The conversations that once sparked joy sound hollow. The relationships that once defined you feel foreign. Even your own reflection seems like a ghost of someone you used to know. This is what mystics call the dark night of the soul, the quiet death of who you thought you were. It isn't depression in the clinical sense, though it often feels like it. It's a spiritual undoing, the disintegration of identity, the loss of the false self you've worn for so long that you forgot it was a disguise. Psychologists might call it ego death, the mind's desperate attempt to hold on to its old stories, while the deeper self demands liberation. You can feel it in your nervous system, that trembling confusion, the mix of grief and relief, like mourning your own shadow. The brain, wired for stability, panics when its senses collapse. It floods you with fear and doubt, convincing you that you're falling apart. But in truth, you're being dismantled, so something new can take shape. Neuroscientists who study trauma integration describe it as neural pruning, old connections dissolving to make space for new ones. What feels like destruction is actually creation in disguise. You're not losing yourself. You're shedding what was never truly you. Imagine a garden in winter. The soil looks barren, lifeless, almost forgotten. But beneath it, unseen roots are rearranging, preparing for something you can't yet see. That's what this season of darkness is, the quiet reconstruction of your inner world. You'll feel like you're disappearing because, in a way, you are. The version of you built on approval, control, or fear is dissolving, and that dissolution hurts. The applause fades, the noise dies down, silence becomes your only witness. But maybe, just maybe, your sadness isn't failure. Maybe it's your soul outgrowing its old cage. Maybe the emptiness you feel is not a void, but a doorway. The ancient philosopher
The emptiness is a doorway. They dropping, boys. Don't nobody tell us about this. Don't nobody teach us this, bro. They give us fucking drugs talking about you got depression and anxiety and say that you're sad. But in real life, you trying to figure out yourself. Why nobody teach this shit?
Heraclitus once wrote, "The soul is dyed by the colour of its thoughts. Perhaps yours is simply changing hue. The world will tell you to move on quickly, to fill the silence, to distract yourself with new beginnings. But real transformation doesn't rush. It lingers in the ruins. Because before something inside you can be born again, something else must first be allowed to die." Have you ever noticed how the world applauds you when you stay the same but grows silent the moment you change? Society has a strange affection for consistency. It wants you to be predictable, understandable, easy to categorize. Be reliable, they say. Be stable. But what they really mean is, don't evolve too far beyond our comfort zone. Because the moment you start transforming, you threaten the fragile order that keeps everyone pretending they're content. From childhood, you're taught that identity is something to protect, not question. You choose a career path and are told to stick to it. You fall in love and are told to never change too much. Even your friends, the ones who say they want the best for you, can become unsettled when you start to outgrow the role they're used to. You were the quiet one, the funny one, the reliable one. But now you're something else, uncertain, introspective, becoming. And that terrifies them, because your transformation exposes the stagnation they've learned to justify. Philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre called this bad faith, the act of living in self-deception, pretending that we're fixed entities instead of beings in motion. To admit that we can change would mean admitting that everything stable might be temporary marriages, beliefs, hierarchies, even the self. So society builds cages of identity and rewards you for staying inside. The employee who stays 20 years in the same job is called loyal. The one who leaves to start anew is called reckless. The partner who sacrifices growth for comfort is called devoted. The one who evolves beyond what love can hold is called unfaithful. Nietzsche called it the tragedy of becoming. He believed that humans fear evolution.
So, let's say this: we was in a relationship with a female and we get married. When I outgrow her, is it wrong for the divorce? Ooh.
Because it demands the death of certainty. To grow is to let go of what once made sense, to stand in the chaos between who you were and who you're becoming. But culture doesn't celebrate chaos, it medicates it. It teaches you to suppress your metamorphosis with distractions, routines, and applause for conformity. And yet, somewhere deep within, your spirit aches for more. You feel it when your ambitions no longer fit your surroundings, when your conversations begin to sound rehearsed, when you sense that life is quietly asking you to move, but you stay still because no one else is moving with you. Transformation, in this sense, becomes rebellion. You become like a butterfly, returning to a world that still expects a caterpillar. They see your wings as arrogance, your silence as distance, your growth as betrayal. But what they cannot understand is that change was never an act of defiance, it was survival. And it's in that survival that the loneliness begins, the aching isolation of outgrowing everything that once felt like home. No one warns you that transformation is lonely. They speak of growth as enlightenment, but never of the emptiness that follows. When you begin to shed old identities, it doesn't feel like liberation, it feels like mourning. You start walking through a life that no longer fits, surrounded by familiar faces that no longer see you. Conversations that once flowed now feel rehearsed. Laughter feels like an echo from a version of you that's already gone, and in the silence that replaces it all, you wonder, was change worth the cost? There's a peculiar kind of grief that comes from evolution. Psychologists call it identity loss, the emotional fallout that happens when your internal world changes faster than your external one. Your mind tries to hold on to the past because it confuses familiarity with safety. The neural pathways that once defined your habits, your relationships, your sense of self, they resist being rewritten. The brain doesn't crave happiness, it craves what's predictable. Even if the pain was toxic, it was yours, and that makes letting go feel like betrayal. You begin to miss even the wounds that once defined you, the heartbreak that gave you purpose, the chaos that gave you identity. It's strange how pain can feel like home when you've lived in it long enough. In its absence, you feel naked, undefined, floating in the vast space between who you were and who you're becoming. This is what Carl Jung meant when he spoke of individuation, the painful separation from the collective illusions that once held you. To become yourself is to step away from the comfort of belonging. The loneliness deepens when those around you resist your transformation. Friends pull away, sensing the change but not understanding it. They miss the version of you that was predictable, the one who made them comfortable. Growth, after all, is a quiet form of rebellion, and not everyone wants a mirror that reflects their own stagnation. You don't blame them, but you do feel the
Everybody don't want a mirror of their stagnation. When you're growing, they see, they be like, damn, you changing. They don't want a mirror of them being stagnation still. Oh, that's fire.
ache of walking alone, of realizing that sometimes becoming your true self means leaving behind those who only loved your disguise. In this void, your nervous system trembles. You reach for old habits just to feel real again.
Facts.
You tell yourself stories of return. Maybe I overreacted, maybe I was happier before. But that's just the voice of your old identity begging for resurrection. Because every rebirth demands a burial, and the one being buried now is the self that clung to what no longer fits. And yet, amid the loneliness, something begins to whisper. It's faint but steady, a new rhythm forming beneath the grief. Because there comes a moment when you stop fighting what you're losing and start listening to what's trying to emerge. Eventually, the storm passes. Not because it weakens, but because you've learned how to stand in it without breaking. The silence that once felt unbearable begins to feel sacred. The loneliness that once hollowed you out now becomes space room for something new to grow. You realize that transformation was never about erasing your past, but about reclaiming what was buried beneath it. This is where rebuilding begins, not from the outside, but from within. It's slow, patient work. There's no applause here, no dramatic moment of rebirth. Just small choices repeated until they to become strength again. You start setting boundaries, not as walls, but as lines of respect drawn in the soil of your soul. You begin to write, not to be understood, but to understand yourself. You meet your shadow in quiet moments, noticing the parts of you you once denied: anger, desire, fear, and you stop trying to exile them. You realize they were never enemies, they were messengers. The parts you tried to destroy were simply asking to be heard. Psychologists call this integration the process of reuniting the conscious and unconscious self. It's the healing that happens when you stop fighting your darkness and start learning its language. Neuroscience echoes this truth. Every time you respond to pain with awareness instead of avoidance, your brain rewires itself toward resilience.
So instead of running from like the negative thoughts and shit and distracting yourself, just pay attention to it and see what's going on. Okay, that makes sense. Okay.
New neural pathways form, ones rooted in presence, compassion, and self-trust. It's not about becoming fearless, it's about walking with fear and choosing to move anyway. And in that movement, something miraculous begins to unfold. You start building yourself anew, brick by brick, breath by breath. You discover that stability doesn't mean stillness. It means being rooted enough to bend without snapping. You learn to forgive, not because others deserve it, but because your peace does. You stop chasing validation and start creating meaning. And the strange, tender truth emerges. You were never broken, only rearranged. Transformation, you realize, is not a makeover. It's a remembering. The child who dreamed freely, the soul that trusted life before it was taught to fear, they're still within you, waiting patiently beneath the rubble. And now, with your adult hands, you begin to unearth them. Every moment of awareness becomes a foundation stone. Every breath becomes mortar. Every act of honesty becomes light, breaking through the cracks. You're not escaping your old self, you're guiding it home. And as you rebuild, something inside you whispers, almost like an echo from a life you once knew. What if transformation was never about becoming someone new, but about finally remembering who you were before the world told you to forget? If you look closely at the old photo again, the one that used to make you ache, something has changed. The person staring back no longer feels like a stranger. Their eyes, once naive, now seem gentle, almost forgiving. You see now that they weren't weak, they were becoming. You realize that every version of yourself, every heartbreak, every collapse was not an ending, but a necessary dismantling. Because all life, in the end, is a cycle of death and rebirth. Change was never meant to be graceful. It's violent, disorienting, raw, a kind of sacred destruction. The universe itself operates on that rhythm. Stars collapsing to forge light, forests burning to make room for new roots, hearts breaking to remind us that love isn't found, it's revealed. Nietzsche once wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." You understand now what he meant. The chaos within you was never your enemy. It was the fire preparing you for flight.
So if you don't have chaos, the chaos is actually the key to open the door. So we running from, oh shit, is hell on earth. That's the key to open the door. I'm paying attention.
Carl Jung called this process individuation, the integration of your shadow, your pain, your potential. It's not about becoming perfect, it's about becoming whole. The phoenix does not rise despite the ashes, it rises because of them. Transformation in this way, is not an upward escape, but a downward descent into the parts of yourself you once feared to touch. Into the shame, the grief, the quiet truths you buried. You fall, and in falling, you find wings that were waiting all along.
Okay.
When you begin to live with this awareness, something miraculous happens. You stop fearing the cycles. You no longer panic when things fall apart because you recognize the pattern. Decay is not death, it's the soil of rebirth. The same pain that once felt like punishment begins to look like purification. Every ending starts to shimmer with the quiet promise of beginning again. And so, you breathe. You stop running from the ruins and start building temples out of them. You forgive yourself for the versions that had to die for this one to live. You see that the cracks weren't flaws, they were doorways. You see that every silence, every scar, every sleepless night was leading you here to this moment of recognition, because you were never meant to stay the same. You were meant to evolve, to fall apart and come together, over and over, until every fragment of your being remembers its place in the whole. That is the art of sacred destruction. That is the beauty of the phoenix within you burning, rising, burning again, not to become someone new, but to remember that even in the ashes, you were always the fire.
I like that, man. But hit that like button, comment down below. True shout out to the family. I was not on my phone bullshitting. I was actually listening to everything, and everything do make sense. So it's like we all run from that negative shit, like the negative thoughts, the I'm not good enough and all that, and we just run from it. Where we should be running towards it. To see like what's really going on, like be aware, like why do I feel this way? What is this burden? What is this feeling? And see what it's trying to tell us. That makes sense. I ain't gonna lie, I've been running. I used to meditate, now I just been running, and shit been going down here. So shit, we might just meditate. See what our thoughts talking about, man. So I'm gonna see y'all in the next video.